Bavaria, Germany, April 23rd, 1945, 6:47 in the morning. Greta Hoffman stood 20 meters from the barbed wire fence, but the smell had already found her. Not the thin, watery soup she had survived on for the past 9 days. Not the metallic tang of canned meat that never seemed to contain actual meat. This was something else entirely. Something that made her knees weak and her hands shake. Something that smelled like home before the bombs fell, like Christmas morning in 1942, like her father's kitchen when the world still made sense. The smell of bacon, real American bacon, sizzling in a cast iron pan somewhere beyond those wire fences. And Greta Hoffman, 23 years old, former Wehrmacht telephone operator from Hamburg, started crying. Not because she was hungry, though she was. Her last real meal had been 22 days ago. Not because she was weak, though she could barely stand without her vision going dark at the edges. She cried because she knew with absolute certainty that the smell drifting toward her on the cool Bavarian morning air was a trap. A beautiful, cruel, perfectly executed trap. Because the enemy never feeds you bacon. Not unless they want something far worse than your death. Over the next 3 days, 47 German women in this temporary prisoner camp would refuse to eat the most delicious food they had ever smelled. They would cry, they would pray. Some would try to starve themselves rather than touch a single piece of American food. But by day 10, every single one of them would understand a truth that shattered everything they had been taught to believe. A truth so simple, it seemed impossible. This is not a story about war. This is a story about breakfast. Not about bullets and bombs, but about bacon and eggs and what happens when the enemy treats you better than your own country ever did. And if you want to understand why the smell of frying meat could make a young woman weep with terror, you need to know what she had been through in the 3 weeks before that April morning. If you served in World War II, or if your father or grandfather told you stories about treating prisoners of war, leave a comment below. These stories matter. The younger generation needs to hear them. They need to understand what real American values look like when they were tested in the hardest circumstances imaginable. But first, you need to understand who Greta Hoffman was and why she believed with every fiber of her being that kindness from an American soldier could only mean one thing: death. 3 weeks earlier, Hamburg, Germany, April 1st, 1945. The concrete bunker beneath the Wehrmacht Communications Center smelled like damp wool and fear. Greta sat at her station, headphones pressed against her ears, routing calls between officers who barked orders in voices that grew more desperate with each passing hour. Around her, 47 other women did the same work, connecting calls, relaying messages, pretending they could not hear the panic creeping into every transmission. The war was ending. Everyone knew it. The Americans were coming from the west, the Russians from the east, and somewhere in the middle, the machinery of the Third Reich was grinding itself to pieces. Greta's last proper meal that day was soup. Potato soup so thin she could see the bottom of the metal bowl through the gray liquid. 3 pieces of black bread, hard as wood. Half an apple that had gone soft and brown. She ate slowly, chewing each bite 30 times like her mother had taught her before the bombs took their apartment and everything in it. Before the night in July of 1943, when the firestorm turned Hamburg into hell and her mother never made it out. She ate slowly because somewhere deep inside, in a place she did not want to examine too closely, she knew this might be the last real food she would see for a long time. She was right. That evening, the political officer arrived. Hauptmann Dietrich, 42 years old with a face the color of old paper and hands that trembled when he tried to light a cigarette. He stood before the assembled women and read from a printed sheet. His voice cracked on every third word. "The Americans are coming," he said. "They will not kill you quickly like the Russians. They will do something worse. They will feed you poisoned food. They will inject you with experimental drugs. They will use you for medical testing like the Jews were used, like animals, like nothing." Greta watched Hattie Keller, the 19-year-old radar operator from Dresden, turn white. The girl's hands clenched into fists. Her breathing went shallow and rapid. Next to her, Dr. Margaret Wolf, 31 years old, Vienna-trained physician, kept her face blank. But Greta saw her jaw muscles tighten, saw her swallow hard. "Is it true?" Hattie whispered. "Can it be true?" Greta did not answer, because she did not know anymore. They had lied about so much, about the war being won, about the miracle weapons that would save them, about the enemy being weak and broken. But what if this one thing was true? What if the Americans really were monsters? Hauptmann Dietrich folded his paper. He looked at them with eyes that held no hope, no conviction, nothing but exhaustion. Then he picked up his backpack, the one that suddenly looked very full and heavy, and he walked out into the night. They never saw him again. When morning came, the officers were gone. All of them. The commandant, the signals captain, the logistics lieutenant. Every man with rank had vanished like smoke. They had taken the vehicles, taken the fuel, taken the food stores. Left behind 48 women with nothing but their worn gray uniforms and the sound of artillery getting closer by the hour. For 3 days, they survived on what they could find: a 50-kilogram bag of oats in the storage room, 4 cans of meat that had expired in 1943, rainwater they collected in rusted buckets. Greta rationed everything with precision: 2 handfuls of raw oats per person per day, 1 spoonful of the questionable canned meat, water boiled over fires they built from broken furniture. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. By day 4, Hattie could not keep food down. Her stomach had shrunk too much, rejected everything. Dr. Wolf made her chew the oats, slowly swallow tiny amounts. It helped, but not enough. By day 6, 3 other women were vomiting up what little they ate. By day 7, everyone had stopped talking about food because it hurt too much to think about it. Greta tried to find roots in the forest, dandelion greens, anything edible. But it was early April. Nothing had grown yet. The ground was still cold and hard. She found some wild onions, bitter and small. They ate them raw and wept from the taste. On day 9, Hattie fainted, just collapsed in the middle of the bunker floor. Dr. Wolf caught her before her head hit concrete, checked her pulse, listened to her breathing, then looked up at Greta with eyes that said everything words could not. This girl is dying. They are all dying. We have maybe 3 more days before someone does not wake up. That night, Dr. Wolf called them together. 47 women because one was too weak to stand. Wolf's voice was steady, clinical, the voice of someone who had delivered bad news to families for years. "We surrender," she said, "not to the Russians. They are too far east. To the Americans. Tomorrow morning we walk west with white flags. We take our chances." Some of the women cried. Some prayed. Greta just sat there thinking about Hauptmann Dietrich's words. About poison. About experiments. About dying slowly in American hands instead of quickly from starvation. Which death, she wondered, would be kinder. Morning came cold and gray. They had no white flags, so they tore strips from bed sheets, tied them to branches. 47 women formed a ragged line and walked out of the bunker that had been their prison and protection for 6 months. They walked through the pine forest with hands raised high, white cloth fluttering in the spring breeze, their boots crunching on fallen needles, and their hearts hammering against their ribs. Greta walked at the front. She had been a telephone operator, not a soldier. She had never fired a weapon, never seen combat. But she was from Hamburg, from the docks, from a world where you learned early that fear was something you swallowed and kept moving through. So she walked first. If someone was going to shoot, let them shoot her. They emerged from the forest into a cleared area, an old farm abandoned, stone walls crumbling, fields empty, and there, standing beside a jeep with a rifle slung over his shoulder, was the first American soldier Greta Hoffmann had ever seen. He was tall. That was her first thought. Taller than most German men she knew. Broad-shouldered, maybe 38, maybe 40. He wore the uniform of a staff sergeant, and when he turned to look at them, Greta saw his face was deeply tanned, weathered with lines around his eyes that came from squinting into the sun. A Texas face, she would learn later. A ranch hand's face. The face of a man who had spent his life working under open sky. Staff Sergeant James Bradley from Amarillo, Texas. 38 years old. Medic. Veteran of North Africa and Italy. And the man who would save her life in ways she could not yet imagine. He looked at them. 47 starving women in filthy uniforms with their hands in the air. He did not raise his weapon, did not shout, did not even look particularly surprised. He just stood there for a long moment, then turned and called over his shoulder, "Eddie, get out here!" Another soldier emerged from the farmhouse, younger, maybe 24 or 25, shorter, rounder, with dark hair and a wide, friendly face. He took one look at the line of women and his mouth fell open. "Jesus Christ, Sarge. They are women." Bradley nodded slowly. Yeah, I can see that. The two Americans had a brief conversation in English that Greta could not follow, but she watched their faces. Watched the way the younger one, Eddie, kept looking at them with something that looked almost like distress. Watched the way Bradley's expression stayed calm, controlled, professional. Then Bradley walked toward them, slowly, hands visible, rifle still slung on his shoulder. He stopped 3 meters away, close enough to speak, far enough to not be threatening. Krieg ist vorbei, he said in terrible German. War is over. Ihr seid sicher. You are safe. No one moved. No one spoke. Greta felt her heart beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was the moment. This was when they would find out if the propaganda was true. Bradley studied them for another moment. Then he turned back to Eddie and said something that Greta would learn the meaning of much later. Something that would change everything. Get blankets, coffee, and Eddie, make breakfast, real American breakfast, bacon, eggs, biscuits. The whole deal. Eddie stared at him. Sarge, that is prisoner rations for a week. Bradley's voice went flat, hard. I do not care. Do it. And that was how it started. Not with violence, not with interrogation, not with any of the things Greta had been taught to expect, but with an order to make breakfast. Real American breakfast. For the enemy. They were taken to a temporary camp, not a prison in the traditional sense. Just an open area with tents set up, barbed wire fence around the perimeter, American soldiers standing guard. They were given blankets first. Thick wool blankets, scratchy but warm and clean. Actually clean. Hattie took hers and just stared at it, like she could not comprehend what she was holding. Another woman, Frida, 28 years old from Munich, started crying the moment the fabric touched her skin. Not from sadness, from confusion, from the cognitive dissonance of receiving kindness from people she had been taught to hate and fear. They were given water next, clean water in canteens, not from a bucket, not boiled over a fire, just clean, clear water that tasted like metal impossibility. Greta drank carefully, small sips. Her stomach could not handle more. But even those small sips felt like a miracle. Then they waited, sat on the ground wrapped in their new blankets, surrounded by American soldiers who did not threaten them, did not touch them, just watched over them with expressions that ranged from curiosity to pity to something Greta could not quite identify. And then the smell started. 6:30 in the morning. The sun was just beginning to burn through the clouds. And from somewhere beyond the tents, a scent drifted on the air that made every woman in that camp go completely still. Bacon. Not the thin, sad strips of fat that passed for meat in Germany. Not the ersatz protein made from God knows what. Real bacon. American bacon. Thick cut, smoking and sizzling in hot fat. The smell was rich, salty, complex. It carried notes of maple and hickory smoke. It smelled like a memory of better days. Like childhood. Like peace, or thoughts. Greta's mouth flooded with saliva so fast she almost choked. Her stomach, which had been a tight knot of hunger for 9 days, suddenly came alive. Cramping, demanding, screaming at her to find that food and eat it. Now eat all of it. Eat until the pain stopped. But her mind was screaming something else entirely. Poison. This is poison. This is the trap. They want you to smell it and want it and need it so badly that you will eat it. And then you will die. And they will say it was your choice. They will say you were given food and you took it, and it is not their fault that you died. Around her, she heard women starting to cry. Not from hunger, from fear, from the terrible realization that they were about to be tested in a way none of them were prepared for. Dr. Wolf sat perfectly still, her medical mind working through the implications. Hattie had gone pale, her hands shaking. Frida was whispering prayers under her breath. The smell grew stronger, closer. And with it came other scents, eggs cooking in butter, fresh baked bread, coffee. Real coffee, not the acorn substitute they had been drinking for 2 years. The smells layered over each other, building into something overwhelming. Something that attacked every sense and every instinct. Greta closed her eyes, tried to breathe through her mouth, but it did not help. The smell was everywhere, in her hair, on her clothes, inside her lungs. She could taste it on the back of her tongue, could feel her body betraying her, preparing for food it might never safely eat. Footsteps approached. She opened her eyes, Staff Sergeant Bradley was walking toward them, and behind him came the younger soldier Eddie carrying a large metal tray. Steam rose from it. The smell intensified until it was almost painful. Bradley stopped in front of Greta. He looked down at her and she forced herself to meet his eyes. They were brown, tired, kind if she was willing to believe that an enemy could be kind. "Ma'am," he said through a translator who had appeared another American soldier with a German name and a Wisconsin accent. "You need to eat." The translator repeated it in German. "Sie müssen essen." Greta shook her head, could not even speak, just shook her head and felt tears running down her face. Bradley knelt, slowly, moving like someone approaching a frightened animal. He reached for the tray Eddie was holding and took a plate from it. On that plate was more food than Greta had seen in a month. 4 strips of bacon, thick and glistening. Scrambled eggs, fluffy and golden. 2 biscuits with butter melting into them. A small glass of orange juice. He set the plate on the ground in front of her. "Please," the translator said. "You are safe. This is just food." Greta stared at the plate, her vision blurred. Her hands would not stop shaking. Every instinct in her body was at war. Hunger versus fear, desire versus survival. The smell was making her dizzy, making her stupid, making her want to grab that bacon and shove it into her mouth and damn the consequences. But she could not move, could not reach out, could not make her hand close the distance between her body and that plate of poison. Because that was what it had to be. Nothing else made sense. Nothing else fit the world she understood. Bradley watched her for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked her more than anything else that morning. He picked up one of the bacon strips, brought it to his own mouth, and ate it, right there in front of her. Chewed, swallowed, waited. "See," the translator said, "not poison, just food." Greta wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But her mind would not let her. He probably took an antidote first, she thought. He probably has something in his system that protects him. This proves nothing. All around her, the same scene was playing out. American soldiers offering plates of food. German women refusing. Crying. Turning away. Some were too weak to even shake their heads. They just lay there, wrapped in blankets, tears streaming down their faces, while the smell of bacon slowly drove them insane. Bradley stood up, spoke to Eddie in English. Eddie's face fell. He looked at the women like his heart was breaking. Then he nodded and they walked away, taking the tray of food with them. But the smell remained. For hours after, the smell of bacon hung in the air. A ghost of a meal they could not bring themselves to trust. A promise they could not bring themselves to believe. Greta lay down on the hard ground and pulled her blanket over her head. But she could still smell it. Could still feel her stomach trying to eat itself from the inside. Could still hear Hattie crying softly nearby. "This is how we die," she thought. Not from bullets, not from bombs, but from being too afraid to accept help when it is offered. She was wrong, but she would not know that for 3 more terrible days. 3 days of watching American soldiers bring food and take it away uneaten. 3 days of getting weaker while surrounded by plenty. 3 days of learning that sometimes the cruelest torture is not violence, but kindness you cannot bring yourself to accept. And somewhere beyond the fence, Eddie Kowalski from Chicago stood beside his field kitchen and wondered how the hell you convince someone to save their own life when everything they have been taught tells them that salvation is just another form of death. The answer would come, but not today. Today there was only the smell of bacon growing cold in the morning air, and 47 women who would rather starve than trust the enemy with their lives, even when that enemy was trying everything in his power to keep them alive. Day 2 began at 5:30 in the morning with the sound of Eddie Kowalski starting his field kitchen. The scrape of the cast iron pan on the grate, the hiss of the propane burner coming to life. And then precisely at 6:15, the sound that had haunted Greta's dreams all night, the sizzle of bacon hitting hot metal. She was already awake, had been awake for hours. You could not sleep when your body was eating itself from the inside. Could not rest when every cell in your being was screaming for food while your mind screamed warnings about poison. The 2 parts of her were at war and neither side was winning, just slowly destroying each other in the trenches of her consciousness. The smell reached her tent before the sun reached the horizon. That same rich, smoky, impossibly delicious smell. But this time it was worse, because now she knew exactly what it was. Could picture the thick strips of meat rendering their fat edges curling and crisping. Could imagine the salt and the sweetness and the way it would feel to have real food in her mouth again. Her stomach cramped so hard she had to curl into a ball. Beside her, Hattie made a small sound, not quite a moan, not quite a sob, just the sound of someone in pain who had run out of ways to express it. Dr. Wolf sat up. Her face was drawn gray in the early light. She had lost weight even in the past 2 days. They all had. When you were already starving, every day without food was a countdown to organ failure. He is doing it again, Frida whispered from across the tent. Why does he keep doing it? Because he wants us to break, another woman answered. Maria, 32, from Berlin. Her voice was bitter, exhausted. He wants us to beg, to degrade ourselves. Then he will have won. Greta said nothing. She was not sure anymore what winning looked like. Was it winning to die with your dignity intact? Was it winning to refuse food from the enemy until your body gave out? Or was the real victory simply survival by whatever means necessary? Her brother Friedrich would have known. He had been the strong one, the certain one. But Friedrich was dead in a mass grave outside Kursk. And Greta was here trying to figure out if accepting bacon from a Texan constituted betrayal or common sense. At 7 o'clock, Sergeant Bradley came. Same as yesterday, same calm, weathered face, same patient movements. Behind him came Eddie with the tray, and behind Eddie came the translator, Sergeant Otto Braun from Milwaukee, a man caught between two worlds just like the women he was trying to help. Bradley knelt in front of Greta again. This time he did not offer the plate immediately. He just looked at her. Really looked. And Greta saw something in his eyes that she had not expected to see. Not pity, not superiority, not the cold calculation of an interrogator. Concern, actual human concern. How long has it been since you ate? Otto translated. Real food, not scraps. Real food. Greta's voice came out as a rasp. 24 days. Bradley's jaw tightened. He looked at the other women, back to Greta. 24 days. Jesus Christ. He set the plate down. Same as yesterday, bacon, eggs, biscuits. But this time he added something else. A small glass bottle. Coca-Cola. The red and white label bright against the gray morning. This is not poison, Otto said, translating Bradley's words. This is just breakfast. The same breakfast I ate this morning. The same breakfast Eddie ate. The same breakfast every American soldier in this camp ate. We are not trying to hurt you. We are trying to feed you. Then why not just give us the food? Greta heard herself ask. Why do you need to watch us eat it? Why do you care if we eat it all? Bradley was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, and Otto translated carefully. Because I have seen what happens when starving people eat too fast. I have seen them die from it, die from the very thing that should save them. And I will be damned if I let that happen again. Not on my watch, not to anyone. There was something in his voice, something raw. Greta looked up at his face and saw pain there. Old pain, recent pain. This man had seen things, had lost people, was carrying ghosts. Where Dr. Wolf asked suddenly, where did you see people die from eating? Bradley turned to her. His eyes met hers, and Greta saw him make a decision. Buchenwald, he said quietly. 2 weeks ago, we liberated a camp called Buchenwald. The word meant nothing to Greta. She had never heard it. But something about the way Bradley said it, the weight he gave those syllables, made her skin go cold. What is Buchenwald? Wolf asked. Bradley looked at Otto. Otto looked uncomfortable. Then Bradley nodded, and Otto began to speak, translating words that would crack Greta's world open like an egg. A concentration camp. For Jews. For political prisoners. For anyone the Reich wanted to disappear. 20,000 people, starving, dying. We brought food, good food. We thought we were saving them. But some of them ate too much too fast. Their bodies could not handle it. 12 people died in the first 48 hours. Not from bullets, not from disease, from refeeding syndrome. Their hearts stopped, their lungs filled with fluid. They died because we fed them too much too quickly. The silence that followed was absolute. Greta felt something cold spreading through her chest. Concentration camps. For Jews. 20,000 people. You are lying, Maria said. There were no such camps. That is Allied propaganda. Bradley looked at her. His face was stone. I wish I was lying, ma'am. I wish to God I was lying. But I saw it. I walked through it. I helped bury the bodies. And I will never, ever forget what your government did to those people. He stood up, looked down at all of them. And when he spoke again, his voice was harder, colder. So you understand why I am not going to let you eat too fast. Why I am going to control every bite you take. Because I failed those people at Buchenwald. I gave them food and they died. And I will not fail you. Even if you hate me for it. Even if you think I am poisoning you. I will keep you alive whether you trust me or not. He walked away. Eddie followed, taking the untouched food with him. Otto lingered for a moment, looking at them with an expression Greta could not read. Then he too left. The women sat in silence. Greta's mind was spinning. Concentration camps. Thousands of people. Could it be true? Could her country have done something like that? Or was this just another layer of the psychological warfare? Break them down with stories of atrocities. Make them doubt everything they believed. But Bradley's face, the pain in his eyes, that had not looked like a lie. Dr. Wolf spoke first. Her voice was clinical, detached. Medical. Refeeding syndrome is real. I learned about it in medical school. When a severely malnourished person eats too much too quickly, the sudden influx of glucose and electrolytes can cause fatal complications. Cardiac arrhythmia, respiratory failure, cerebral edema. It is a documented phenomenon. So he is telling the truth, Hattie whispered. About the medical part, at least. About that part, yes, Wolf agreed. About the rest, I do not know. I do not want to know. But Greta thought she did want to know, needed to know. Because if Bradley was telling the truth about Buchenwald, then everything else she had been taught might also be a lie. And that thought was more terrifying than any poison could ever be. The day dragged on. At 10 o'clock, Eddie brought food again. Different this time. Toast with butter, weak tea, small portions. He set them down, spoke softly in English that none of them understood except the tone, which was gentle pleading. Then he left. The food sat there, growing cold, untouched. At 2 o'clock, he brought soup, chicken soup with soft vegetables. The smell was different from bacon, but just as devastating. Greta's mouth watered. Her hands shook, but she did not move. At 6 o'clock, he brought the evening meal. More bacon, more eggs, fresh biscuits. And this time, Greta saw something that broke her heart. Eddie's hands were shaking as he set down the tray. His eyes were red. This young American soldier, this enemy, was crying as he tried to feed them. He said something in English, then again more desperately. Otto was not there to translate, but Greta understood the emotion even without the words. Please, please, just eat. Please do not do this. Eddie left the food and walked away quickly. Greta watched him go and felt something shift inside her. This was not the behavior of someone trying to poison them. This was not calculated cruelty. This was a man who cared about feeding people the way some men cared about their faith, with everything they had. That night, Hattie's condition worsened. She had been weak before, but now she was fading. Her pulse was thready, her breathing shallow. Her skin had taken on a waxy, translucent quality that Greta recognized from watching her mother die. Dr. Wolf examined her by the light of a kerosene lamp, felt her pulse, listened to her chest, checked her pupils, then sat back on her heels. She has maybe 24 hours, Wolf said quietly. Maybe less. Her body is shutting down. We have to get her to eat, Frida said. We have to make her eat what Maria snapped. The poison, the experiment. You want to kill her faster. It is not poison, Greta heard herself say. The words came out before she could stop them. Everyone turned to look at her. It is not poison. I am sure of it now. How can you be sure, Maria demanded? Because no one would waste this much effort on poisoning us. Because they could have just let us starve. Because that American boy was crying when we would not eat his food. Because Sergeant Bradley has pain in his eyes when he talks about people dying from eating. Because none of this makes sense unless they really are trying to save us. The logic was weak. She knew it. But it was all she had, all any of them had, a choice between two impossible things. Trust the enemy or die with your certainty intact. I am going to eat, Greta said. Tomorrow morning, when they bring breakfast, I am going to eat it. And if I die, then you will know. But if I do not die, then Hattie needs to eat too, Because I will not watch her die when there is food 10 meters away. You are a fool, Maria said. Maybe Greta agreed, but I am a living fool. For now. She lay down and tried to sleep. Failed. Listened to Hattie's labored breathing. Listened to the other women shifting and whispering. Listened to her own heartbeat counting down the hours until she would make a choice that could not be unmade. Dawn came gray and cold. Eddie started his kitchen at the usual time. The bacon began to sizzle at 6:15. And at 7 o'clock, when Sergeant Bradley knelt in front of Greta with a plate of food she did not refuse, her hand shook so badly she could barely control it. But she reached out, picked up a piece of bacon, the one that had gone cold yesterday and been replaced this morning. The fat had congealed slightly. It felt greasy between her fingers. Real, solid, undeniably present. She brought it to her mouth. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst. This is it, she thought. This is where I find out if I am brave or just stupid. She bit down. The texture hit her first, the crispy outside cracking between her teeth, then the chewy inside still tender despite being cold, then the flavor, salt and smoke and a sweetness she had forgotten food could have, fat coating her tongue, grease on her lips, the taste of something real and rich and completely impossibly good. She stood absolutely still, waiting for the pain, waiting for the burning, waiting for her throat to close or her vision to go dark or her heart to seize up. Nothing happened, just taste, just the best thing she had eaten in months, maybe years. She swallowed and started to cry. Not from fear this time. From relief so overwhelming it felt like drowning. From the realization that she was not going to die, that the food was real, that she had been wrong about everything. She took another bite, then another. Bradley was saying something, but she could not hear it over the sound of her own chewing, could not focus on anything except the miracle of having food in her mouth again. Real food. Food that tasted like it was supposed to taste. Food that might actually keep her alive. Slowly, Bradley's hand appeared in her field of vision, gently pressed down on her wrist, stopping her from taking another bite. Langsam, he said, one of the few German words he knew. Slowly. Otto appeared translating. You have to eat slowly, small bites. Wait between them. Let your stomach adjust. If you eat too fast, you will get sick. Maybe die. Please, trust me on this. Greta nodded, set down the bacon. Her hands were still shaking, but for a different reason now. Not fear, just the physical weakness of someone who had not eaten properly in weeks. Bradley handed her a fork, showed her a small portion of eggs. This much. Then wait 5 minutes, then this much more. Understand, yes, Greta whispered. I understand. She ate the way he showed her. Tiny bites, long pauses. It was torture of a different kind, having food right there and only being allowed nibbles. But she trusted him now, trusted that he knew what he was doing, trusted that this protocol, this careful measured feeding, was keeping her alive. Around her, other women were watching her eat, watching her survive. And one by one they began to reach for their own plates. Not everyone. Maria still refused, 3 others with her. But the rest, including Dr. Wolf, made the same terrible leap of faith that Greta had made. Chose possible death over certain starvation. Chose to trust the enemy because they had run out of other options. Hattie was too weak to feed herself. Wolf had to help her. Tiny spoonfuls of scrambled egg, drops of orange juice, each swallow a victory. Each minute that passed without collapse a small miracle. Eddie stood nearby watching. And this time when he cried, it was not from frustration. It was from relief. The rest of that day passed in a haze. Every 4 hours food came. Small portions. Carefully measured. Bradley or Eddie or one of the other American soldiers would sit with them, making sure they ate slowly, making sure they did not gorge themselves into cardiac arrest. Greta felt her body waking up. Felt energy returning in tiny increments. Her hands stopped shaking. Her vision cleared. The constant headache that had been her companion for weeks began to fade. By evening, she could stand without getting dizzy, could walk a few steps, could think clearly enough to realize what had just happened. She had survived. They had all survived. Not because of German strength or Nazi ideology or any of the things she had been taught made a person worthy, but because an American soldier from Texas had decided that hungry people deserved to be fed. that enemies could become human beings again with enough patience and bacon. That night, Bradley came by the tent one last time. He did not bring food this time. Just stopped at the entrance, looked in at them. "How are you feeling?" Otto translated, "Alive." Greta answered. And that was all there was to say, really. Alive when she had expected to be dead. Alive because the enemy had refused to let her starve. "Good," Bradley said through Otto. "Tomorrow you can eat a little more. Slowly, always slowly. In a week, maybe two, you will be strong enough to move to a larger camp. They will process you there. Eventually you will go home." "Home," Greta repeated. The word felt strange. Hamburg was not home anymore. Home had burned in the firestorm of 43. But maybe she could find a new home. Maybe survival was enough for now. Before Bradley left, Greta stopped him, waited for Otto to come close enough to translate. "The camp you mentioned," she said. "Buchenwald. Was it real?" Bradley's face went still. Hard. "Yes, and there were others." "Yes. How many?" "Too many." Greta nodded slowly. Part of her wanted to ask more, to know details, to understand what her country had done while she was routing telephone calls and pretending everything was normal. But another part of her, the part that had just barely chosen life over death, could not handle that truth yet. "Not today. Thank you," she said instead. "For feeding us, for not letting us die." Bradley looked at her for a long moment. "You are welcome. But you should know something. I did not feed you because I am a good person. I fed you because you were hungry. That is all the reason anyone needs." He walked away into the darkness. Greta lay back down on her blanket, full for the first time in weeks, warm for the first time in months, safe for the first time since the war began, and troubled for the first time in her life by questions that had no easy answers. If the Americans could be kind to their enemies, what did that make them? If her own government could run death camps for civilians, what did that make her? She had not known, had not participated, but she had worn the uniform, had served the machine, had believed the lies even when the evidence of her own eyes should have told her the truth. Tomorrow she would have to think about that. Tomorrow she would have to reckon with what she had learned. But tonight she just ate her small evening portion of soup and bread. Slowly, carefully, exactly as Sergeant Bradley had taught her. And with each bite, she understood a little more clearly that the most revolutionary act in war is not violence. It is mercy, and especially mercy shown to those who do not deserve it, who have not earned it, who might still hate you even as you save their lives. The bacon had been good, the eggs had been good, the biscuits and the orange juice, and even the weak tea had been good. But the real nourishment, the thing that would sustain Greta Hoffman for the rest of her long life, was simpler than that. Someone had seen her suffering and decided it mattered, even though she was the enemy, even though her country had done terrible things, even though she had believed lies and served evil without knowing it. None of that had mattered to the man with the bacon. She was hungry. That was enough. And in that simple truth, Greta began to understand what it meant to be human again. Day 7 arrived with something Greta had not experienced in longer than she could remember. She woke up without the grinding ache of starvation in her belly. Her head was clear, her hands were steady. When she stood, the world did not tilt and spin. Her body, which had been shutting down one system at a time for weeks, was remembering how to function. The transformation had not been dramatic, not a sudden burst of health, just small improvements accumulating. Each carefully measured meal adding a little strength, each hour of sleep actually restorative, instead of just a brief escape from consciousness. By the 7th day, Greta could walk the perimeter of the camp without needing to rest, could carry on a conversation without her thoughts scattering like startled birds, could look at food and see sustenance instead of potential death. The other women were improving too. Hattie had color in her cheeks again, still pale, still thin, but alive in a way she had not been 3 days ago. Dr. Wolf had stopped looking like a corpse in a uniform. Even Maria, who had held out until day 4, was starting to move with something approaching normal human energy. But the real changes were not just physical. Something else was shifting. Something harder to quantify, but impossible to ignore. At breakfast that morning, Eddie brought the usual portions: bacon, scrambled eggs, half a biscuit, coffee. But this time he also brought something new. Small glass bottles with red and white labels. Coca-Cola. 47 bottles, one for each woman. Greta picked hers up, turned it in her hands. The glass was cold, covered in condensation. She had never seen anything like it. In Germany, there was beer, there was water, there was ersatz coffee made from acorns. But this was something else entirely. Eddie demonstrated through Otto's translation. You twist the cap, like this. The metal cap came off with a small hiss and pop. Then you drink. Greta brought the bottle to her lips. The first thing she noticed was the carbonation. Bubbles hitting her tongue sharp and almost painful. Then the taste. Sweet. Impossibly sweet. With flavors she could not identify. Not quite vanilla, not quite caramel, something medicinal underneath. Something that tasted like it came from a factory, from a world of plenty, where people could afford to make drinks just for pleasure. It was unlike anything she had ever tasted, and she hated that she loved it. Hattie made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a capaw. Es ist wie Freiheit in Flaschen, she said. It is like freedom in bottles. The phrase stuck. For the rest of the day, that was what they called it. Bottled freedom. The strange American drink that fizzed and sparkled and tasted like a country that had never known real deprivation. Eddie watched them drink with a smile so wide, it looked like it might split his face. Greta saw tears in his eyes again, but good tears this time. The tears of someone watching a thing he cared about finally going right. That afternoon, a truck arrived with supplies. Among them, boxes of clothing, American clothing, work shirts and dungarees, practical shoes with rubber soles, proper undergarments that were not falling apart from years of washing and rewashing. The Wehrmacht uniforms they had been wearing were barely holding together. Gray wool worn thin, stained with mud and sweat and the evidence of hard months. The Americans did not order them to change, just offered the new clothes and left them in a pile. Greta picked up a pair of dungarees, blue denim, thick and sturdy. She held them against her waist. They would be too big. She had lost so much weight. But they were well made, strong stitching, quality fabric. Better than anything she had owned even before the war. She changed in the privacy of the tent. The denim felt stiff at first, unyielding, but as she moved, it began to conform to her body. The material was dense enough to last. These were not fashion clothes. These were work clothes. Clothes made for people who labored. But the quality was remarkable. Dr. Wolf examined her own pair with a physician's eye for detail. They make these for common workers, she said quietly. And yet they are better constructed than the dress uniform I wore to medical school graduation in Vienna. It was not a question, just an observation. But Greta heard the unspoken implication. What kind of country gave its laborers clothes of this quality? What kind of economy could afford to manufacture sturdy dungarees for anyone who needed them? The propaganda had told them that America was weak, decadent, soft, that its people were lazy and its industry second-rate. But everything Greta had seen contradicted that. The food was plentiful and good. The equipment was well made. Even the simple act of giving prisoners proper clothing revealed a logistical capability that Germany had never possessed. We were lied to, Frida said. She was holding a cotton work shirt, running her fingers over the seams. About everything. Not everything, Maria protested. She had finally started eating, but she still clung to the old certainties. Germany was right about some things. We had to defend ourselves. Against what, Wolf asked. Against whom? The Americans who are feeding us. The Americans who gave us medicine when Hattie had fever yesterday. The Americans who are treating us better than our own officers did. Maria had no answer to that. None of them did. That evening, the Americans did something unexpected. They organized a baseball game. Soldiers against soldiers, just for entertainment. They set up a makeshift diamond in the open area beside the camp and invited the German women to watch. Greta had never seen baseball, had no idea what the rules were. But she sat on the ground with the others and watched as young American men threw a ball and swung wooden bats and ran in circles that seemed to have no tactical purpose whatsoever. Eddie was playing. He was not good, missed the ball more often than he hit it. But when he did connect, when the bat cracked against leather and sent the ball flying, he ran with such joy that Greta found herself smiling despite everything. A young private, tall and thin with red hair, hit the ball far enough that he ran all the way around the bases. His teammates erupted in cheers. They picked him up, pounded his back, celebrated like he had won a battle instead of just a game. Why, Hattie asked. Why do they celebrate so much for something that does not matter? Because it is fun, auto-translated from a nearby soldier's explanation. Because they like the game. Because joy does not always need a purpose. Fun. Joy. Purposes beyond survival and duty and service to the state. These were concepts that felt foreign to Greta, dangerous even. She had been raised to believe that frivolity was weakness, that pleasure without purpose was decadence, that real strength came from discipline and sacrifice and putting the collective above the individual. But watching these American soldiers laugh and play and celebrate meaningless victories, she wondered if maybe strength could also come from knowing how to be happy, from building a society where people had enough that they could afford to waste time on games. After the baseball game ended, Eddie brought out a gramophone, an old machine hand cranked with a brass horn. He set it up on a wooden crate and carefully placed a black disc on the turntable. Then he cranked the handle and lowered the needle. Music filled the evening air, not a military march, not Wagner or Beethoven or any of the heavy, serious music that had been considered appropriate in Germany. This was something else. Light and bouncing with horns and drums in a rhythm that made Greta's foot tap without her conscious decision. Glenn Miller Otto said, "In the mood." Very popular in America, the music was undeniably cheerful, infectious even. Several of the American soldiers started dancing, not formal ballroom dancing, but something looser, more energetic. They grabbed each other's hands, spun around, moved their feet in patterns that looked improvised and free. Eddie walked over to where Frida was sitting. He extended his hand, made a small bow. His meaning was clear, even without words. Dance. Frida looked terrified, looked at the other women for guidance. But what could they say? That dancing with the enemy was forbidden. That accepting this a small kindness was betrayal. Those rules seemed hollow now, pointless. Frida took his hand, stood, let Eddie lead her into an approximation of a swing dance. She did not know the steps, kept stumbling. But Eddie was patient, laughing when she stepped on his feet, showing her the basic rhythm. Within minutes, other soldiers were asking other women. Not demanding, asking, offering their hands and waiting for consent. And one by one, the German women who had been certain they would die in this camp began to dance with American soldiers under the Bavarian sky. Greta did not dance. She watched Hattie giggling as a young corporal twirled her, carefully mindful of her still fragile health. Watched Dr. Wolf moving with surprising grace, her medical precision translating into clean footwork. Watched even Maria Stern, Maria allowing herself a small smile as she followed her partner's lead. This was wrong. It had to be wrong. These were the enemy. These were the men who had bombed German cities, killed German soldiers, destroyed the Reich. Fraternizing with them was betrayal. Dancing with them was collaboration. But it did not feel wrong. It felt like being human again. Sergeant Bradley appeared beside her. He did not ask her to dance, just sat down on the ground a respectful distance away. For a while they sat in silence, watching the others move to Glenn Miller's orchestra. "Your country," Greta said in halting English. She had been learning, picking up words. "It is very different." Bradley lit a cigarette, offered her one. She shook her head. He shrugged and smoked alone. "Different how?" he asked. "Everything. Food, clothes, music, the way you treat people, even enemies." Bradley was quiet for a moment. The cigarette glowed in the growing darkness. "You think we are soft," he said, "because we are kind. I do not know what to think anymore." He took a long drag, exhaled smoke into the evening air. "Let me tell you something. Kindness is not weakness. It takes no strength to be cruel. Any coward can beat a prisoner. Any fool can starve someone weaker than themselves. But to have power and choose mercy, to have every reason to hate and choose compassion instead, that takes real strength." Greta considered this. In Germany, strength meant hardness, meant the ability to do difficult things without flinching, meant sacrifice and discipline and the subordination of individual feeling to collective will. But maybe Bradley was right. Maybe there was another kind of strength. The strength to see suffering and choose to end it even when you had no obligation. The strength to treat enemies like human beings even when they had not earned it. "Your government," she said carefully. Bradley had mentioned Bokenwald. She still did not fully understand what that meant, but the weight he gave the word told her it was important. Your government does not run camps like ours did. Bradley's face went hard. No, we do not. Why not? He looked at her directly. Because we believe some things are wrong no matter who they are done to. Because we think every person has dignity just by virtue of being human. Because that is what it means to be American. At least that is what it is supposed to mean. We do not always live up to it, but we try. Greta felt something inside her chest, some old certainty finally cracked completely open. For 12 years, she had been told that the German way was the right way, that strength meant purity, that some people were simply worth more than others, that the collective good justified any individual suffering. But here was an American sergeant telling her the opposite, telling her that every person mattered, that dignity was not earned but inherent, that true strength was measured not by what you could take, but by what you chose to give. And he was backing up his words with actions, feeding enemies, clothing prisoners, dancing with women who had served the Reich, treating them not as conquered foes but as hungry people who needed help. The music changed, something slower, a crooning voice singing about white Christmases. Several of the women started crying, not from sadness, from memory, from the sudden, overwhelming weight of nostalgia for a time before everything fell apart. Hattie broke away from her partner, came and sat beside Greta. Her young face was wet with tears, but she was smiling. I remember this song, she said. We had a record of it. Before. Papa would play it every December. Sophie and I would dance in the parlor. Your sister Greta said. Sophie. Hattie nodded. 12 years old. If she is still alive. I do not know. I have not heard from home in months. She will be alive, Greta said with more certainty than she felt. And you will see her again. You will go home and play this song and dance with her again. Hattie leaned against Greta's shoulder. I hope so. I hope I get to tell her about this, about the Americans who fed us, about the music and the baseball and the soldier who taught me to swing dance, even though I am supposed to be his enemy. You will tell her, Greta promised. You will tell everyone. We all will. And in that moment, Greta understood what her mission was now. Not to serve the Reich was dead, not to fight for Germany, Germany had lost, but to bear witness, to remember, to tell the truth about what had happened here, about the American sergeant who refused to let them starve, about the Polish-American cook who cried when they would not eat his bacon, about the small acts of mercy that had saved their lives when they had no right to expect salvation. The dancing continued until full dark. Then Eddie packed up his gramophone and the soldiers drifted back to their posts and the women returned to their tents. But something had changed. Some barrier had been crossed. They were not quite friends yet, but they were not quite enemies anymore either. That night, Greta lay in her tent thinking about home, about Hamburg, about whether there was anything left of the city she remembered, about her father if he had survived, about Friedrich's grave in Russia that she would never see. Tomorrow they would be transferred. Sergeant Bradley had explained it through Otto. They were strong enough now to move to a larger POW camp. There they would be processed officially, given papers, eventually sent back to Germany to begin whatever came next. Greta was not afraid anymore. She had been afraid of the Americans, afraid of their food, afraid of their kindness. But that fear had been based on lies. The truth was simpler and somehow more complex. The Americans were not monsters. They were just people. People with enough food to share. People with a belief that even enemies deserve basic dignity. People who played baseball and danced to swing music and cried when others suffered. And if the propaganda had lied about the Americans, then it had probably lied about everything else too. About the Jews, about the camps, about the war itself. Greta would have to live with that knowledge now. Would have to reconcile what she had believed with what she had learned. Would have to figure out how to be a German in a world where Germany had done terrible things, where she had been complicit through ignorance and inaction. It would not be easy. Nothing about the future would be easy. Germany was in ruins. The economy was destroyed. The political system had collapsed. She would be going home to a country that no longer existed except as geography and language. But she would be going home alive, fed, clothed, treated with more kindness by the enemy than she had received from her own government in the final months of the war. And she would carry that with her. The memory of bacon and eggs served with patience. The taste of Coca-Cola, Cola like bottled freedom. The sound of Glenn Miller and the sight of tired soldiers choosing to dance instead of hate. These were small things, meaningless in the grand scope of history. The war would be remembered for its battles and its atrocities, for its millions dead and its cities destroyed. No one would write about Eddie Kowalski's field kitchen or Sergeant Bradley's careful feeding protocols or the night German prisoners danced with American soldiers under a spring sky. But for Greta Hoffman, these small things were everything. They were proof that even in the worst circumstances, even when every reason existed for cruelty and revenge, human beings could still choose to be kind, could still see each other as people instead of abstractions, could still offer mercy to those who had no claim to it. She fell asleep that night with a full stomach and a changed heart, and she dreamed not of war or hunger or fear, but of a future where the lessons learned in this camp might somehow matter, where the simple act of feeding the hungry might be remembered as what it was. Not charity, not strategy, just basic human decency in action. The most American thing of all. Morning came too soon. The transfer trucks arrived at 8 o'clock. 47 women gathered their few possessions. The American clothes they now wore, the blankets they had been given, small items the soldiers had shared. Otto had given Hattie a chocolate bar for her sister. Eddie had written out his mother's pierogi recipe for Frida in careful English and phonetic Polish. Sergeant Bradley stood by the trucks checking names against a roster. When Greta reached him, she stopped. She had been practicing all night. "Thank you," she said in English, "for my life, for all lives." Bradley looked at her. His weathered face showed something that might have been pride, might have been relief, might have been simple satisfaction at a job well done. "You are welcome. Take care of yourself. And when you get home, feed someone who is hungry. Pass it on." "I will," Greta promised. "I will remember." She climbed into the truck. The engine started. And as they pulled away from the camp where she had expected to die and instead learned to live again, Greta looked back one last time, saw Eddie waving, saw Bradley standing with his arms crossed watching them go, saw the field kitchen where bacon had been cooked every morning for 10 days straight, saw the place where her enemy had saved her life by the simple act of refusing to let her starve. The truck rolled forward. Germany waited. An uncertain future waited. But Greta Hoffman was ready, because she had learned something in that camp that would sustain her through whatever came next. Kindness was not weakness. Mercy was not foolishness. And sometimes the people you were taught to hate were the ones who saved you when everyone else had given up. She had been given a gift, not just food, not just life, but a new understanding of what it meant to be human in a world that had forgotten. And she would spend the rest of her days making sure that gift was not wasted, that the Bacon Protocol, as she had started thinking of it, would live on not in history books, but in action, in small acts of mercy, in choosing to feed the hungry regardless of who they were or what they had done. Because at the end of everything, that was what mattered. Not nationality, not ideology, not the grand sweep of history, just one hungry person and another person with food choosing to share it. Everything else was details.